Hey everyone, we're back now with all of the black cards from Zendikar Rising. Actually, it is arriving right now at the store. UPS is outside, so we will actually have it for the pre-release, which is a sigh of relief. I mean, it's been a crazy year, but jumping right in here, Acquisitions Expert, a 2-mana 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals cards equal to the size of your party. You choose one of those cards and they discard it. So, I mean, it's probably not the best. A lot of these cards, I mean, you can assess them like you're in Christmas Land, or you can assess them like they're going to often play out. And kind of the worst case scenario for this card is you play it, it's the only creature in your party, and they can actually kill it in response. I mean, you're not even going to snag a card at that point. Best case scenario, you get to get the best card out of their hand, which is really interesting and solid. But overall, this one, I'm not super excited about it. I could see maybe in some type of constructed situation where it could potentially be good enough, but it just really feels like discard late in the game. So many decks can be hellbent. This one feels like as much feel-bads as they've been able to get out of the game, this one may produce some feel-bads for you if you're sleeving it up. All right, Agadeems Awakening. This is one to be excited about. At triple black plus X, you're going to return to the battlefield from your graveyard any number of target creatures that have different converted mana costs, X or less. So if you're going to jam this at, say, X equals, let's say, 7 mana, that's an amount of mana that people spend reasonably sometimes. You're going to get a 4, 3, 2, and 1, and 0 from your graveyard, potentially. And that is potentially fine in limited, having something that can just have a big swing, especially with Enter the Battlefield abilities. Of course, I think people are mostly going to be looking to use this in unfair ways, which would be getting massive amounts of mana through some type of combo or mana engine and jamming this for ridiculous X costs and just getting back like an insane amount of creatures. Or the other side of this, which is actually the thing I'm the most excited about, which is not very fun for the people that like the Lord of the Rings style ghost invasion. I think this could be very interesting in like Legacy Belcher. The ability to play this as a mana source in the deck. I mean, I think I'm going to do this with Dark Rituals and Cabal Rituals. Like, I hate Rite of Flame. I think the card is hot garbage. So being able to go like black in Belcher with like 4 of this, and then they've got the red one as well. I don't know. That to me is actually one of the coolest things here, is these cards that are mana sources but not actually lands. I mean, we'll see. This looks like it could actually be legacy playable in my estimation in Belcher. So that's just my first thought on seeing this is, oh, here's a mana source that works in Belcher and potentially lets me play Dark Ritual instead of all of those terrible red rituals. We have Black Bloom Rogue, 3 mana for a 2/3 with Menace, and it gets +3/+0 as long as your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Kind of this rogue theme, caring about your opponent having 8 cards. I'm a little surprised on that one too. I think that's another feel bad mechanic. Generally, you're going to be keeping an eye on your opponent's graveyard, hoping for them to get to 8, and they're going to disappoint you. Either it's not going to happen, or they're going to be using their graveyard. Like if you're playing against a deck with Euro, I mean, that's no good. Like, they're going to be counting like 6 cards, 7 cards. Oh, there's a Euro. Okay. We're back down to 1 card in the graveyard, and just, it's going to be ice skating uphill for sure. Now, the intention is that this is going to work with the milling factor of Rogue, but we'll see how good that actually is. And very often in Constructed, your graveyard is a resource. There are so many decks that actually can use their graveyard as some type of advantage. Euro's a perfect example right now as he's dominating in Standard, but I mean, you think about like a deck like Storm is going to be getting Threshold and stalking their graveyard for Past in Flames. Heck, they can flash back Past in Flames on you and just absolutely wreck you. So milling your opponent is a dicey proposition, one that doesn't always end in your favor. Blood Beckoning, 1 black mana. There's a old formula that I came up with a long time ago to help out a friend who was interested in spoiler season, because every time sets would come out, he'd want to talk to me about Magic cards that were literal garbage, And it was just a waste of my time. I didn't enjoy shutting him down. He would feel frustrated because he was all excited about things, and he'd feel like a moron when I tell him that the cards were garbage. And then, of course, as time went on and he got to see that indeed the cards were garbage, he totally understood I wasn't just being mean. It was just that the cards were garbage. So one of the things is cards that cost 1 mana. That's one of the rules. Maybe we'll hit the other rules as this goes on, but cards that cost 1 mana are worth examining pretty much always. Now, they're not always worth talking about, but they're always at least worth reading. And here, at 1 black for a sorcery, you can return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. We've had that since the beginning with Raise Dead, but if it was kicked, you can get 2 creature cards back. So this is a 4 mana, return 2 creatures, which is potentially going to have some use somewhere. It's a strictly better Raise Dead, and while not a super exciting card, it's probably fine for your pre-release pool. Being able to get back 2 creatures can be pretty difficult to overcome when they're your 2 best creatures and your opponents use, some good removal on it. So this card's not embarrassing in my estimation. And, creatures are often going to die. Blood price, 4 mana for a sorcery to look at the top 4 of your library, 2 into your hand, the rest on the bottom, you lose 2 life. If this was an instant, it would be completely insane. However, here, pretty fairly costed, and kind of reminiscent of some of the other scry effects that we've had. But here you're getting perfect information. You're actually looking at all 4 instead of trying to use your general understanding of the game and probability to decide whether or not to scry cards to the bottom first and then end up getting cards that end up being worse. So, this card's totally fine. At sorcery speed, like I said, it's tough to imagine where that fits in any type of constructed format, but, it is a common, so perhaps, Pauper just has so much good card drawing, it's tough. The effect is definitely something some decks would like in Pauper. Blood Chief's Thirst, another 1 mana spell to destroy a creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 2 or less. And if it was kicked, just destroy target creature or planeswalker. So 4 mana to destroy any creature or planeswalker, and only 1 mana to hit a creature or planeswalker that costs 2 or less. That's not bad. That's not bad. Sorcery speed, not ideal for removal. Really, one of the strongest things about removal is the ability to get 2 for 1. So when your opponent is attempting to do something to buff their creature, either an enchantment or even equipping with a piece of equipment that has an ETB to equip to that creature, that can be a 2 for 1 of sorts. So obviously when you go to play an enchantment on a creature and you kill it, that's a 2 for 1, straight up 2 cards. But when you respond to equip effects, that also it's like part of a card. You're basically getting the creature card and the mana that was invested. So, and the tempo, which is actually one of the more important and complicated parts of Magic. One of the things that makes it so great. So this one, good. I think it's solid. But I think you're going to sleeve it up if you're playing black in your pre-release pool. But again, it could have been better. But if wishes were fishes. Coveted Prize, 4 in a black. Talk about wishes and fishes. This could cost 1 black mana, and if it does, you're going to be searching the library for a card and shuffling your library. But with that full party, you can cast the spell with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana. So you can search for any card, but then you play a card from your hand, so you don't have to reveal that card and play that one. So that's a very interesting way of pulling things together if it didn't revolve around the party. This would be the type of card Show and Tell would be super happy to play if it somehow had a party where you could just go get the thing you're going to put in and then cast the Show and Tell from your hand. That would be phenomenal. Deadly Alliance, 4 in a black, again, costing less for the party, so maybe just cost 1 black, destroy a creature or planeswalker. It's worth noting that all of these cards that care about the party are a little bit stronger when they have a creature type on them. So if a card says, +1/+0 for each creature in your party, and it's also a creature for your party, there's a little bit of an extra edge to evaluate when you're thinking about how good the card's going to be and how often your party size is going to matter. So here, at 5 mana to destroy a creature or planeswalker, it's actually playable in a lot of limited formats. Just a 5 mana, I should be able to think of some of them. I can't right now, but there's definitely 5 mana removal spells that I've sleeved up and it's been acceptable. Obviously, you know, if you have Murder or Doomblade, it's going to be way better, but, you know, it's not always the case. Demon's Disciple, 2 and a black for a 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, each player sacks a creature or Planeswalker. That or Planeswalker is what kind of makes this one a more interesting card. We've seen this effect many times before at these exact same stats. Now, the Human Cleric isn't a new aspect. In the past, they've mostly been zombies, I believe. But here, also hitting a Planeswalker, I think makes this a very interesting card where those decks like Super Friends that might not have that much in the way of creatures lying around, you can go ahead and get one of their Planeswalkers, which is not bad for a 3/1 body if you're sacking like a token or something inconsequential, or if you've got recursion for this guy. That's an interesting card. All right, Drana, the Last Blood Chief at 5 mana for a 4/4 flyer. Already going to be happy to be sleeving that up. And whenever it attacks, the defending player chooses a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard. You return it to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter, and it's a vampire. That is a phenomenal card for limited. Super dangerous, has to be answered immediately, and that is going to be rolling people on pre-release weekend. I also, on a side note, love the art. Beautiful composition here and use of color. And then also just the name, the Last Blood Chief. I mean, I think that's an awesome card name too, because that will inspire people. Like, it'll make them curious. It's like, what is this character's story? So overall, you know, 10 out of 10 on this one. This is fantastic. Oh, and it's a cleric. Why not? So this adds to your party as well. So loving this card. This is one of my favorites for the pre-release that I've seen up until this point. Drana's Silencer, 6 mana for a 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets -X/-X for your party. So potentially -4/-4, which would be a very, very good effect. It is a rogue, so worst case scenario, you're probably getting -1/-1, barring them removing this in response to the trigger. So, I mean, this card's probably going to be very good. It's expensive, it's overcosted, perhaps. It's no Flame Tongue Kavu, but, I mean, Flame Tongue Kavu is one of the best limited cards of all time, so this one's not going to be embarrassing in it at a common. I think this one's totally fine. Just a little expensive. But the effect is very good. Dreadworm, 4 and a black with a landfall of gaining Indestructible. So this one's a worm horror, not going to help out with the party at all, but it's a 5/4 that's potentially going to be indestructible. Now, remember, as those turns go on, the landfall gets a little bit more difficult, whereas you're going to be hitting your first 4 land drops pretty much every game. Otherwise, you're just getting wrecked. You know, turn 5, hopefully on turn 5, pretty consistently, but you don't. There's some games where you never hit your 5th land drop and still win. But as you keep going, it starts getting more and more unlikely. Or, you know, if you are continually making your land drops, it's because all you're drawing is lands and you're falling behind. So this one's, I think, fine. I think it's even just as a 5/4 for 5. It's not terrible, but getting Indestructible is very strong. Usually that means that they're going to have to chump block it or just eat the 5. So it kind of gives a quasi evasion where it makes it so, you know, they can't really block it effectively. It's not like they've got a 4-power creature and they can trade. They just have to throw something under the bus. So Indestructible, it's odd, but it does end up playing as a type of evasion a lot of the time in Limited, just because it's not that they can't block it, it's that they can't block it well. Anything aside from like regenerating creatures or somehow a larger creature, which is a big ask on a 5-power situation. Basically, it's a type of evasion, is one way to think about that when you're evaluating your pool. Expedition Skulker, 2 mana for a 2/2, and has Death Touch as long as you control another rogue. Just seems like a quality 2-drop. The 2 toughness keeps it out of range of some of the pinging style effects that we have, and Death Touch is very solid for trading up with larger, more dangerous creatures. So the fact that this can get in early beats and then potentially prevent attacks early on while you just continue attacking in the air or with other type of evasion makes this card totally solid in all likelihood. Feed the Swarm. This one, man, like this breaks the color pie. This is a really interesting printing and at common. So this is probably going to be on my list for the top 10 cards for Pauper. We're going to destroy a creature or enchantment an opponent controls and lose life equal to the permanent's converted mana cost. Yeah, I mean, black just destroying enchantments. That's something that it previously just wasn't able to do. That was something that they've stayed away from for like 27 years. And, I mean, occasionally they'll dabble with certain types of effects and kind of bleed the color pie, but I mean, this is a genie out of a bottle. Commander players are going to be playing this to handle enchantments. The life is not as important in that format, and I'm just surprised at the printing. I really am. Usually they need some type of artifact like a Devil's Disc or something if they want to get an enchantment off the board. Ghastly Gloom Hunter, 2 mana, 1/1 flyer with lifelink, and if it was kicked, it comes in with 2 +1/+1 counters. So a 6 casting cost 3/3 flyer with lifelink is a lot to contend with. That's a big swing, and if your opponent's not able to get into the air to do combat with this thing, I mean, it's going to be tough to race. You're either going to be losing 3 life every turn, you're going to be gaining back the 3 life, and that's pretty graphic, especially when you combine it with equipment or any type of other pump effects. So this card, I think, is going to be reasonable despite the 1 power 2 casting cost side of it, which is not nearly as exciting. But later on, you're getting that extra value out of it, and if you do have ways of making it bigger early, you can definitely run away with games. I mean, Vault Scourge, I'm playing in a mono-green Pauper deck, just a 1/1 flyer with lifelink for 1, and anytime that you can be pumping that guy up, you're generally winning versus the aggro decks, which is kind of all that pre-release pools are, is you're basically all a type of aggro deck. It's not like people are comboing out for the most part. Ghoul draws Mucklord. This 3 casting cost 2/3. When it dies, you get a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. And this one's fine. This is fine. It's fine. If you had a bunch of these, like if you're playing a bunch of these and your opponent's playing like 2/2s and 3/3s, like you're actually going to do better because your 2/3 is going to turn your other 2/3 into a 3/4, which is going to dominate. So, I mean, this is fine. Just not super exciting. Art kind of looks like the Mucklord, the crocodile, is doing like a jazz hands thing, but I mean, this one's... They're just trying to make it more exciting with the art, I guess. We've got Hagra Constrictor, a 3 mana that enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 has Menace. So basically, here we've got a 3 mana 2/2 with Menace, and then it also gives the ability of Menace to all your other creatures with +1/+1 counters. So that could definitely be very welcome if you have a +1/+1 counter theme going in your deck. Hagra Mauling, an instant for 4 or maybe 3 mana, destroy target creature, costs 1 less to cast if an opponent controls no basic land, which is an odd clause. I'm not sure. It's just a weird clause. Now, this one can also come in as a black producing source, albeit tapped, but yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one. Your opponent's gonna have basic land at the pre-release, so it's gonna cost 4, and it's fine. If you're playing black, you're obviously gonna sleeve this one up. Destroying creatures is one of the most important things you can do in Limited. Highborn Vampire, 3 and a black for a 4/3. It's also a warrior. It's reasonable stat lines. There's a bunch of 3-power 2-drops in this format, which makes this, you know, a little more dicey, but overall, this is a potential role player for your pre-release pool if you're in black. Inscription of Ruin, 2 and a black. And if you kick it for an additional 2 and 2 black, bringing the total retail up to 7, you're going to get to pick all of these. So normally you're going to pick either your opponent discards 2 cards, you return a creature with converted mana cost 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, or target creature with converted mana cost 3 or less, you just get to destroy it. So that's all fine. Like, destroying a creature for 3 is a little overcosted. Returning the creature from the graveyard to the battlefield, again, slightly overcosted perhaps. Your opponent discarding 2 cards is actually pretty much where that would normally cost. But if you're doing all of those things, that's a pretty big swing. And the fact that this is a discard spell, which also can be creature removal, I mean, I think this is a very good card for Limited. If you're playing it later on in the game when you're flooded out, I mean, that is pretty brutal. The swing there can be massive, and getting rid of those last couple of cards from your opponent's hand can actually be a total blowout. The problem with discard is sometimes your opponent's hellbent Also, the problem of your opponent holding on to a bunch of lands to discard. Though in this set, you know, those lands might have been helpful for the landfall triggers. So, Lithoform Blight. We've got 2 mana aura. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Enchanted land, lose all land types, and has basically becomes a mana confluence. And yeah, I don't know. Drawing a card for 2 mana, it's an enchantment. I don't know if we'll see any type of play in any type of enchantress builds, but it's interesting. I mean, it's uncommon, so we don't really get to entertain the thought for any type of pauper enchantment decks. But this one seems fine. I kind of like it. I mean, I just like drawing cards. It's a card game, so cards are a good thing. Malakir Blood Priest, 2 mana, 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X and you gain X, where X is the number of creatures in your party. So potentially incredible with a full party. And early on, seems totally fine too. So this one's going to be a role player. It's a cleric for your party. And, you know, it's going to be just a reasonable 2-drop to try and commit to the board early and start applying some pressure. Malakir Rebirth for 1 black. It's a instant. Choose a creature, you lose 2 life until end of turn. That creature gains. When this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control. And I'm glad it's not a common. I'm not gonna have to figure out if this is worth playing in Zubera Storm. Could be. You don't have to worry about the issues with Undying Evil not being able to be stacked up multiple times. But yeah, this one, usually we get a bonus with this type of effect. So instead of it costing more mana, now you just have the losing 2 life and no upside. So Supernatural Stamina is a card very similar to this, which it gives the creature +2/+0. And then the other one is gives the creature Undying, which will give it a +1/+1 counter when it returns. So this one's, I think, actually a pretty good use of this style of card. You've got this kind of fringe, useful card. They didn't ramp up the mana, they just made it a slightly worse effect. And I think I actually like that more. I think the higher mana costs actually feel a little bad to me on a lot of these lands that can come into play tapped. It's almost like 2 bad choices, which could be fine, don't get me wrong. The utility of being able to choose either one may outweigh the fact that both options are not phenomenal. The card will probably never be total trash, but in this instance, I think this is how I would have rather seen more of these done, I think. But, you know, I haven't played the format yet, so we will see. Marauding Blight Priest, a 3-power, 3-mana creature. When you gain life, each opponent loses a life. And this one's going to be pretty dangerous. This reminds me a little bit of Cabal Archon back in the day. Actually played in a, what was it, a GPT or something? It was like a big sealed deck. It was a sealed deck tournament, and the top 8 was a draft, and it was queuing for something. I was really just there to win the prizes. I didn't even know about the organized play element of it. And top 8'd pretty easily. And then in the top 8, built a soldier deck. This is back in Onslaught and Legion before Scourge. I was like, there's no possible way I can lose in combat. I was just dropping, you know, like 8-power Daru Stingers. I mean, it was ridiculous. And my opponent beat me without attacking me once. They just had Cabal Archon and a bunch of clerics and just life loss. And this reminds me of that. So a little bit of flashback to that tournament, however long that was, like 20 years ago. Which actually, I guess, reminds me of how important it is to make these pre-release memories. Like, playing with the set on pre-release weekend and, you know, having those type of memories with your friends. I'm so glad that we're able to sell the pre-release kits directly to you guys, and you can actually play the games and have some fun. You know, it's a very different thing once everyone's solved the format, you know, kind of looking back. It's just different. Like, you can only read a book for the first time once. You know what I mean? Like, the second time you read the book, Pat Rothfuss has said this, like, it's still a special thing. Like, it's the first time that you read the book for the second time, but like figuring these cards out as you're playing and kind of figuring out the cards that you enjoy and will be looking for the next time you draft is a process of discovery that certainly now, as I've been playing for like 25 plus years, I look back on fondly with each set. So, you know, this weekend, get out there, play some of those matches with your friends, build those sealed decks, and have a lot of fun, and to really discover the set and kind of figure out, you know, your relationship to these cards in terms of what you're going to be looking for in draft and what you value, what you think is actually going to get you what you're looking for, if it's victory or if it's just trying to win in a particular way. Mind Carver, 1 black, and this one, again, has that 8 or more cards clause. It is super good if your opponent has 8 or more cards. I mean, 1 black to give a creature +3/+1 and to stick around for when that creature dies, phenomenal. Normally, it's just going to be +1/+0. And the nice thing, though, is this does stick around and ramp up. So even if you play this on like turn 2 or probably not turn 2, but turn 3, 4, 5, as the game progresses, eventually that equipment will be stronger, assuming that your opponent doesn't have some way of using their graveyard. You know, you keep killing their creatures, keep pushing, and then eventually, you know, you'll probably get there. Though I do think it'll be a little bit frustrating to just be hanging on at like 6 or 7 cards and just waiting to see that finally work. Mind Drain at 2 and a black. Target opponent discards 2, mills a card, loses a life, and you gain a life. So this one will add 3 to your 8. And the fact that it's, well, potentially, remember, if they have no cards in hand, this is going to be straight up awful. But if they do have 2 cards, it's going to put 3 into their graveyard and really keep you going towards your goal of them having 8 or more. And this one, probably going to be playable. Usually I wouldn't sleeve up a card like this very often, but I could see it. I could definitely be convinced to play this, particularly if I'm making the decision in a draft. In between going like mono black or like black with a splash, I'd probably rather play this than add a whole new color. Nighthawk Scavenger. This is a scary card. Like, this is actually pushed. I don't know if people are talking about this thing yet, but Vampire Nighthawk was a main deckable card in the era of Jace the Mind Sculptor Standard and Worldwake. Like, that card was very, very good and just ruined any type of plans that people had of winning with creatures. Either you're going to trade with the Death Touch or you're going to invalidate with the Lifelink. Just hitting for 2 in the air each turn where they're trying to attack with their creatures on the ground, and it's just embarrassing. This one is way worse. Like, way worse for your opponent. It's a 1/3, sure, but like, your opponent's going to have cards in their graveyard. Yeah, I don't know. It's like a flying Tarmogoyf with lifelink. The 3 mana, obviously, is a major distinction there, and it does only count your opponent's graveyard, but you can pretty reliably, in many formats, expect to have a land, instant, and sorcery. At that point, it's a 4/3 flying lifelink. I don't know. This one looks actually really quite good to me. I'm surprised by this printing. The 3 toughness does mean it's going to easily die to Lightning Bolt and Chain Lightning. But aside from that, I mean, this is a legit threat. You know, it dies to removal. I mean, everything does. Like, it's just a ridiculous saying. So, like, yeah, it can get Abrupt Decay. It dies to more removal than many other threats. But if it doesn't get answered, I mean, this is just going to be impossible to race for many decks. And it's a rogue. Nimana Skitter Sneak, the 4 mana 3/4, and it gets +1 and menace, +1/+0 and menace at that 8 card reverse threshold. And this one's probably fine. It is a rogue for your party. Not that black has a tough time getting rogues. 2 and a black for a 2/1 flying flash, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent mills 2. This one's probably very, very solid. I actually like this card a lot, especially, you know, like a blue-black thing. I mean, this might even see play in a Pauper deck. The fact that it's a flash creature with 2/1 and a potential upside. Pestermite is a similar card, and this one seems fine. Null Priest of Oblivion. This one is 2 for a 2/1 with menace and lifelink, but if it was kicked, you return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. This one's probably going to see play in Commander, just as a extra kind of reanimate style effect, and I like it. I think it's totally fine. I mean, it's really good for the stat lines. The 2 mana for lifelink and menace, I mean, that is just a huge pain. and I don't think this is embarrassing at all to play on turn 2. I think it's one of the better 2-drops. But if you draw it late, then you can also get a huge upside of getting a creature not only, you know, back to your hand, it's actually going onto the battlefield, which is a really solid value. Overall, I mean, that definitely deserves to be a rare. Oblivion Hunger, 1 and a black, instant. Make a creature indestructible and draw a card if that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it. Definitely like that, especially if you have +1/+1 counters as a kind of sub-theme in your deck. All right, Polacca Predation, 2 and a black. Your opponent reveals a hand, and you choose a card with converted mana cost 3 or greater, and they discard the card. So kind of a reverse Inquisition of Kozilek, but it's for 3 mana. And can't really sign off on this one. This one feels to me like it's probably not where you want to be. At 3 mana, that's an awful lot. And again, they can be hellbent. I mean, they can have no cards with mana cost 3 or greater. I mean, I'm not loving it. I mean, 3 or greater is most of the things that you'd be wanting to take for the most part. But, you know, 3 and under is better for constructed for sure. Scion of the Swarm, 3 and 2 black, flying, 3/3. When it enters, whenever you gain life, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. That's a very dangerous card, and I mean, not going to be bad at all to sleeve up, especially if you have any type of life gain. That can get out of hand very quickly. I mean, it'll be out of hand at a 5/5, I would say. Like 3/3 flying is like potentially you're going to be trading 4. It's like really tough to trade. 5, it starts to be like you're going to have to use some premium removal to get rid of this card, or even worse, double block, and then they get blown out by your opponents, get blown out by removal. So, you know, a 5/5 flyer might feel like, oh, I can put a couple of 3/3 flyers in front of it, but you're putting yourself in a situation where if they have a removal spell after you block, it's a 2-for-1 that's just insane. Scourge of the Skyclaves. Players are definitely excited about this. 1 in the black for a Death Shadow style effect here. And Crazy Kicker, where it's for 5 extra mana, which is a ton. It's kind of the opposite of what you're looking for in Death Shadow style cards, which are like really fast and low to the ground. But that said, if you do kick it, each player loses half their life rounded up, and his power and toughness are equal to 20 minus the highest life total among players. So he is going to be in the graveyard. He is going to... Let's see here. I'll have to look into it. I mean, I think because it's a star, his power and toughness will be equal to 20 minus the highest life total all the time. So in Commander, if it's... You start at 40, so it's going to be -20 right off the bat. Yeah, I don't know. I think that creates some weird interactions, like with returning creatures with total power, X or less. Like, there's definitely going to be some weird rules interactions with this guy. So I think people will probably have fun with him because of that. That's one that I'll have to look into some more. See what type of combos are possible there. Shadow Stinger, 2 and a black for a 1/4. When it deals combat damage to a player, they mill 3 cards, and it can get Death Touch by tapping another rogue. I mean, hey, there's some support for mill. That may be good enough. We will see. It doesn't have exactly evasion, but it's got a big old butt, and it can get Death Touch. So, I mean, that's an interesting card. If you get a seal deck with multiple of these and some other mill support, I mean, you might want to try and live that dream. Shadow's Verdict. This is a brutal magic card. 3 and 2 black. Exile all creatures and planeswalkers with mana cost 3 or less from the battlefield and all graveyards. I mean, that is just wiping everything out. And it's going to play fine with all sorts of cheaper threats like Gurmag Angler. You know, the 5 casting cost kind of puts it out of range from most constructed formats, but I imagine it'll see play in standard sideboards, possibly in certain commander circles where you know that your opponents are going to have lots of like mana dorks and stuff. And then, yeah, just anywhere where you generally don't want your opponent having fun. Just get rid of all of their stuff. Skyclave Shade, 1 in the black for a 3/1, can't block. So we've got a rare, aggressive early beater, and if it was kicked, you get 2 +1/+1 counters. So for 5 mana, you're getting 5 power. 2 mana, you're still getting a 3/1. Either way, really solid value. But then on top of it, you've got a landfall where if it's in your graveyard and it's your turn, you can cast it. So this guy's just coming back. Can't block mercifully, but this is just going to be a relentless attacker either at 2 or 5 mana. I think this one is really, really interesting for limited. It's just an inevitable card. It's not quite evasion, but you know, early on, you're just going to keep swinging with it until they finally have to block it or remove it. And really, the only way to stop this type of card is to get something bigger in front of it for the most part. That is the most common way that you're going to deal with a card like this, is just get like a 4 toughness creature out in front of it. Other than that, I mean, that is a really resilient Magic card. Skyclave Shadowcat. There's some really detailed art. A 3/3 for 4. You can pay 2 and sack another creature to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. This one's got the goods. I mean, responding to removal by making this guy bigger, very solid. I think this card's going to be great in your pre-release pool. And, you know, making your opponent's removal a 1 for 0, like they're killing your creature but you're drawing a card, so they're down a card, but all you've really done is lost something on the battlefield to get something into your hand. That is totally a way to win in Magic. Soul Shatter, 2 in a black instant. Each player sacks a creature or planeswalker with the highest converted mana cost among creatures and planeswalkers they control. Beautiful art, powerful effect. And yeah, this is going to take down whatever the biggest, baddest thing that each of your opponents have. The fact that it's each opponent, I think, means this is going to be seeing a bunch of play in Commander. And, you know, there's a lot of big effects that you can shut down with this. Either large planeswalkers, things like Ugin, or just big creatures. You know, they got an Avenger of Zendikar. They feel like they're going to be totally fine and untap and start going crazy. And they don't have to worry about edict effects. Well, they have to worry about this one. They're not going to be able to choose one of those plant tokens. They're going to have to sacrifice the biggest, baddest thing that they have in most instances. Subtle Strike. This one's interesting. This is like I feel like they put out a card like this in Modern Horizons, like Umezawa's Charm or something, that was like you get one of these effects, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. But this is -1/-1 or a +1/+1. Umezawa's Charm was just the modes of Umezawa's Jite. But the -1/-1 really was the most important one for the most part. +1/+1 counter, very comparable to just giving a creature +2/+2 until end of turn. Very often you only need that 1 extra toughness to survive a trade, and the fact that it sticks around later, plus all the synergy with all of the +1/+1 counters that we've seen, and I think this one's going to be very solid. Figuring out where all of these cards are going to get drafted is going to be tough. Like, I don't know how high a draft pick this will be. It doesn't feel like a super high draft pick, but it does feel like a pick that you're going to want to make at some point. And this is another piece of art that kind of feels a little Lord of the Rings-esque to me. I mean, this feels like the Shelob, or whatever the giant spider is in Lord of the Rings. I think they had a shot somewhat similar to this in the movie. And we also had that Ghost Escape situation on the Black Mythic, which kind of looked a lot like the Ghost Army that Aragorn gets back and then dismisses before actually fighting Sauron, which is, I'm not actually sure why. In the movie, it feels like a plot hole. I don't remember thinking it was a plot hole in the books. Taberax, Hope's Demise, 2 in a black for a 2/2 flyer. He has lifelink as long as it has 5 or more +1/+1 counters on it. How are you going to get counters on it, you ask? Well, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, he gets a +1/+1 counter. If that creature was a cleric, you can draw a card and lose a life as well. And that is a very dangerous Magic card. This guy can get out of hand very quickly, along with all of your clerics. And yeah, I mean, if you're going with a bunch of clerics, this guy's going to be just an absolute mess to play against. And if you ever get to the point where he has lifelink, I mean, come on, like 7 damage with lifelink, like how on earth is your opponent going to keep up with that? This guy is begging for removal. If you don't clear this guy, he's just an absolute nightmare. Thwart the Grave. You know, if I hadn't, just at a glance, this kind of has a Seb McKinnon type of feel to it. It's great that he's making art, but it's also great that the aesthetic of the game is kind of allowing so many more different styles in. I feel like Magic's biggest issue for a while was actually the art kind of feeling homogeneous. I get it as like somebody that's built some systems and done some different things where you're trying to like solve problems and move on to the next ones. It's very tempting to try and take something like art and just solve it and just be like, okay, this is done, let's move on, let's handle the other challenges. But it's never done. Like, the style of the game needs to constantly be fresh and constantly evolve, and I feel like they're embracing that now. I think it's just awesome to see, and I do like this art a lot. It's very interesting. It's the type of art where you kind of want to just be quiet and look at it for a while, which I can't really do given that it's not the best for this format. So we'll just move on. But Thwart the Grave, 4 and 2 black, minus up to 4 for your party. So let's, in Christmas Land, 2 black to return a creature and up to your entire party from your graveyard to the battlefield. So Christmas Land, you already have a party. You had a TPK earlier, and then you return a creature and all of those other creatures from your previous party back. So that would be absolutely tremendous. What a wonderful place that would be to live in. But overall, this is probably an uncommon version of, you know, that mythic of just returning a bunch of stuff from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this one, not usually the type of effects I'm looking to play, just returning stuff from the graveyard. Like, sometimes you don't have a graveyard, early game, they're absolute garbage, and the mana cost on this one is a bunch, but this one's going to be difficult to evaluate. I'm sure it's the type of card that I could lose against just because of the style that I often play of attrition, and man, this will undo a lot of mistakes from your opponent where they can just get back all of those 2-for-1s just potentially for just a couple of mana. So that one's got a lot of power packed into it. Vanquish the Weak at 2 and a black, destroying a creature with power 3 or less. And yeah, I mean, that one's fine. It's not the most exciting. There's definitely a nice mana curve in this set, so it's not like people are only going to be playing with low drops at the pre-release. This will take care of some early drops, and I don't know that this will be considered premium removal, but there are a lot of creatures with kickers that will potentially be pretty big, and you just kind of have a kicker that's been paid to give it stats that don't really represent that mana cost in the upper right-hand corner, which is all that this card cares about. And Zoff's Consumption. Oh, what a gross card. Yeah, look at that. Just filling up on this dead deer. Each opponent loses 4 life and you gain 4 life. It's a big swing. It is a big swing and a mana cost that historically is actually, I think, correct. I think our first 4-point swing was actually 6 mana, like Soul Feast or something, like way back in like Urza's Destiny. And it can come into play as a land. So either way, if this comes down on the first turn, you're not going to feel bad about passing on this 6 mana spell. And later on, if you draw it, it's potentially enough to either win the game outright or just swing things back in your favor. So that card's, I think, actually helped out a lot by being able to enter as a land. Many of the other cards I'm not as excited about for that, but that one's pretty good. So that is it for the black cards. We're going to finish out the rest of the set. It does come out this Friday, and we will have pre-release kits, draft boosters, and we've got some theme or set boosters that we'll be giving away as part of our promotions when you're buying booster boxes and stuff. So thanks for watching, guys. See you on the next one. That is all for this one, but don't worry, there is a lot more. You can check out our older videos, and we're always putting out new videos from ELD's Time Vault Games in Bellingham, Massachusetts. If you want to help the channel, of course, you can like, subscribe, share, tap that notification bell so you can know the next time our new videos come out. Thanks for watching.